Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, Out of Voice Radio. So today, we're going to be having a look at another unknown deck. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. You see, we got the new Unown in Lost Thunder, and a whole bunch of people have been basically taking it upon themselves to try and figure out the best way to make them over the top broken. Over the past couple of days, we've had a look at a couple of decks which are focused on the Unown Damage. There was one that used a combination of Team Magma's Secret Base to put damage on a Pokemon that you popped on the bench, and then Klefki, which you could put on the bench to take the damage, and then Reuniclus that you could use to move the damage onto something like a Wailord, and then you would attach Klefki to a particular Pokemon, and then you would use Weavile to pick it up again, and just repeat till fade. And then just yesterday we had a look at Frozen City and Blastoise, whereby you attach energy to Wailord again, taking 20 damage every time with Frozen City, and using Energy Reset to get the energy and get it all back. And I don't believe there is a good way currently to use Unown Missing. Now, Unown Damage lets you win the game if you've got 66 damage counters on your bench Pokemon. Unown Missing lets you win the game if your opponent has 12 supporters in the discard pile. And yeah, we've got Trumbeak, who lets you look at the top card of your opponent's deck, and if it's a supporter, pop it in the lost zone. And yeah, we've got Girafarig, which lets you put cards in the lost zone of your opponent, but I don't think we have a good way to use this right now. But Unown Hand, we've already looked at one type of Unown Hand deck. I'll pop a link in the description. It's a standard legal deck, and it used stuff like Alolan Sandslash to draw cards, and Sylveon to draw cards, and then using Virizian's GX attack to essentially pick up all of your Pokemon who at that point have got energy on and they're evolved Pokemon, they got tools on, etc. And then you win the game next turn. The big problem with Unown Hand is always going to be this. If your opponent drops something like a Judge or a Marshadow, and that's in standard, in expanded they've got N and they probably will be able to find an N, then you go back to a low hand size. So the thing about Unown Hand is you really need to try and do this all in one go. Because if you try and do it over the course of a couple of turns, you end up potentially in an issue whereby you're very close, your opponent shuffles your hand into your deck. You're very close, your opponent shuffles your hand into your deck, and so on and so forth. But just this past week, the lovely Code64, who is very nice at sharing information, and I love them for it, showed me a deck which I believe was posted by @ham_EX, a Japanese chap over on Twitter, and it uses Unown Hand to try and win the game. Now, we are in Expanded here, and the thing about Expanded is that we've got N. So the one thing I want to make clear right at the beginning here, you need to try and work around your opponent N-ing you. And bearing in mind it's not just N in Expanded, it's Versus Seeker, and between N and Versus Seeker, you can usually get N whenever you want them. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, that's the way it is. But there are 3 cards around which this is primarily based, and the first one of them is Whitney. Now, Whitney's a very fun supporter card, which is a little bit of a pain. Whitney lets you draw 1 card, but then it lets you draw 2 more cards for each other Whitney in your discard pile. It is a flat draw 7, which is phenomenal, but only when you've got 3 other Whitney in the discard, which, to be blunt, is pretty gosh darned awkward. But that's okay, because we got 2 cards in the expanded format which really help. The first one is Battle Compressor. Battle Compressor lets you search your deck for any free cards and discard them. You see what's great about this? You discard 3 Whitney, and then you draw your 4th Whitney and it draws 7 cards. And then you've got Versus Seeker. So what you do is you just use Versus Seeker, and as soon as you've got all 4 Whitney in your discard pile, then drawing a Versus Seeker turns into a draw 7. At this stage, I do need to mention Gladion becomes absolutely vital. You need to have Gladion. Because if you've got any of your Whitney prizes, this doesn't really work. You need all of your Whitney. Gladion becomes super, super important. So the first part of this is that you're essentially playing Whitney every turn to go and draw yourself 7 cards. Okay, sounds like fun. But you know what's better than playing Whitney? Playing 2 Whitney? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where the Dual Brains Magnezone comes in. That's right. We're playing Dual Brains Magnezone. Dual Brains Magnezone is awesome here because it allows you to play 2 supporter cards during your turn. So the goal here, very simply, is to basically play 4 Whitney over the course of 2 turns. 1 with each of your Versus Seeker. Hopefully 5 Whitney, because of course you play 1 before you discard them all. 5 Whitney, 7 cards per Whitney, that is 35. Remember that Unown Hand allows you to win the game if you've got 35 or more cards in your hand. Yeah, see where we're going with this, ladies and gentlemen? You're just using Whitney to draw lots and lots of cards, and you're essentially using Magnezone here to ensure that you can do it turn after turn. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Hang on a second, Ross, that sounds good, but isn't this going to take you 2 or 3 turns to play all the Whitneys? If you're in the expanded format, as you have to be, aren't you just going to keep losing to N? And the answer is, well, you would if you weren't playing the Sableye from Guardians Rising. You see, the Sableye from Guardians Rising has an amazing attack for 1 Darkness Energy limitation. Your opponent cannot play any supporter cards from their hand during their next turn. So they can't play an N. They can still play a Marshadow, but very, very few people are playing Marshadow in Expanded, if anyone, because why would you need to? There's no point in playing it, because you've got N. Well, this turns off N. As a side note, it also turns off every other supporter. Your opponent cannot play something like a Professor Sycamore, so they're not able to actually draw enough cards to set up. Your opponent can't play a Guzma, so they cannot drag your Magnezone into the active to try and slow you down. This stops your opponent getting set up while making sure that they don't play N. And this is essentially it. You just play Whitney turn after turn after turn, while using Magnezone to make sure you can play 2, and then using Sableye to sit there and stop your opponent ever being able to set up and just get absolutely rolling here. This seems like a very, very good deck. This is not quite the Solitaire deck we saw from the other 2 Unowns. I'll pop links to them in the description, but it's still very, very close. It's just, can you keep using Whitney? And there's a possibility that your opponent is able to just have a really good opening hand. And because Sableye is an attack and you cannot use an attack on your first turn going first, it means either you go second and your opponent's had a turn, or you go first and your opponent gets a turn of using supporters. So it's not quite the turn 1 win we saw from the Blastoise deck, and there is the possibility that your opponent just has something like a Buzzwole GX and just naturally attaches enough energy to start smashing and winning the game. This can be done, but they've got to do it without supporters. And this gives you a big advantage over the other Unown decks because you can afford to have a slightly slower start because you're just turning off your opponent's supporters here, which means that they're not going to be able to get up and rolling, which is kind of hilarious. There are a couple other cards I want to mention in this deck nice and quickly. Execute here is really, really handy. You can discard it with Battle Compressor, and then if you need to play something like an Ultra Ball, you can do so without lowering the number of cards in your hand, which of course is very important. You want the most cards possible in your hand. Lily and Tropical Beach are both good for the early game. Obviously, they draw until you've got, well, a certain number of cards in your hand. You can't do this every turn, because hopefully after a turn or 2 your hand's so full you can't use them, but it's certainly good in the early game. And as we're in Expanded, you need an A-Spec trainer, and your A-Spec of choice is Scoop Up Cyclone, so that you can essentially pick up that Magnezone with the Magnemite under it. Hopefully you would also be playing a Floatstone here. Floatstone essentially means you can get the earlier Sableye. You don't want to have to attach an energy to retreat Magnemite, because you then cannot also attach an energy to attack with Sableye, which you absolutely want to be doing. So Floatstone lets you get your Magnemite out the active if you start with it, and also it means that you can attach it to your Magnemite, evolve it into a Magnezone, and then when you play a Scoop Up Cyclone, you actually end up picking up 3 cards rather than 2. Oh yeah, and obviously you need Rare Candy to evolve into Magnezone, but I kind of thought that was a bit of a given. I had reservations about this deck the first time I saw it. I didn't know if it was going to be viable. I didn't know if it would work. But the more I look at it and the more I think about it, the more I'm like, hang on a second. If they can't play supporters, then you've actually got a little bit of time here. And unless they have a really good start, they're probably going to be slow enough to give you time to get this rolling. I love that so many Pokemon players seem to have taken up the mantle of, I can make that Unown work, and I'm going to keep bringing you videos about them, ladies and gentlemen, because I think they are brilliant and fun and wonderful, and I applaud everybody having a go at this. So, as always, I want to know if you think this is viable, so let me know in the comment section, ladies and gentlemen. Go nuts, but please do remember the rule. Do be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at the Wasi, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all of that, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, is to look after yourselves until next time, and to check out youtube.com/WasiPlays. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.